The air in the greenhouse is heavy, damp. The sweet, earthy smell of potting soil and dormant plants. A gentle Seattle drizzle patters against the glass roof. It's a quiet, lonely sound. April 8th, 1994. 8:30 a.m. A man named Gary Smith arrives for work. He's an electrician. His task is to install security lighting above this small, detached structure. He approaches the door. Something catches his eye. A shape, a form slumped on the floor, mostly obscured by a blue tarpaulin. He moves closer, peers through the glass. A mannequin? A discarded store display? A sickening, primal understanding dawns. This is no mannequin. The form is human. A shock of blonde hair, a visible ear, a Converse sneaker untied. The world seems to shrink, the sound of the rain fading into a dull roar. Smith stumbles back, fumbling for a walkie-talkie. Code 499. We have a 499. The police code for a dead body. The response crackles through. Location of the incident. Smith's voice is tight, a wire about to snap. The Cobain residence. Within minutes, the serene, wooded estate is shattered. The crunch of gravel under heavy police boots. The static hiss of radios. The low, urgent murmurs of detectives. They push open the greenhouse door. The scene is frozen in a macabre stillness. There, on the floor, lies Kurt Cobain. The voice of a generation, the poet of alienation, dressed in a white t-shirt and jeans, a shotgun resting across his chest. The air is thick metallic, the smell of old blood. Near his feet, a red box. Inside, a spent shell casing, a wallet, a credit card, a suicide note, written in red ink, addressed to an imaginary childhood friend named Bada. The final, scrawled line is not in red. It's in pencil. I love you, I love you. The official narrative begins to solidify almost immediately. A tragic, yet straightforward, suicide. A tortured artist, a long history of depression and heroin addiction, finally succumbing to his demons. The world would be told he was alone, that he'd been dead for days, that he'd sealed his fate with a single, devastating pull of the trigger. But from this very first moment, the details feel wrong, off, like a photograph slightly out of focus. Why is there no visible blood spatter on the wall behind him, given the devastating power of a shotgun blast? Why is the shotgun still so perfectly, almost delicately balanced on his body? The amount of heroin in his bloodstream was 3 times the lethal dose. How does a man that incapacitated even manage to pull the trigger of a long-barreled shotgun? And the note, that infamous note, it reads less like a final farewell and more like a retirement letter. I haven't felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music along with really writing for too many years now. He speaks of guilt, of faking his enthusiasm. Is the rambling, exhausted missive of a man leaving his job, his fame, not necessarily his life, until that final penciled addendum. The investigation, many will later argue, was swift. Too swift. The Seattle Police Department, perhaps eager to close a case that had already sent shockwaves around the globe, declared it a suicide within days. The scene was cleaned, the body removed. The world began to mourn. But high above the city, in that quiet greenhouse, the questions refused to die. They lingered in the damp air, clinging to the glass like the morning's condensation. They were whispered by fans gathered tearfully at the gates, and they were about to be screamed by a private investigator, a woman who would tear the official story apart, stitch by stitch, and point a trembling finger at a name no one wanted to hear. The grief was a physical presence, a fog that rolled through the streets of Seattle and settled over the world. Radio stations played nothing but Nirvana. MTV aired Unplugged on a loop, Cobain's haunting rendition of Where Did You Sleep Last Night, feeling like a chilling premonition. Vigils turned into riots. The air smelled of rain, candle wax, and tear gas. In the eye of this storm stood Courtney Love. Pale, gaunt, her face a mask of shattered glass behind oversized sunglasses. At a public vigil, she reads passages from the suicide note to a weeping crowd, her voice cracking with a raw, terrifying grief. She wears Kurt's cardigan, hugging herself as if trying to keep his scent from fading. The image is iconic, heartbreaking, the grieving widow. But beneath the public performance, a different story was churning. Privately, Courtney's behavior raised eyebrows. Just days before the body was found, she'd hired a private investigator, a man named Tom Grant. Grant is a former Los Angeles County Sheriff's detective. He's seen it all. He's calm, methodical, with a voice that sounds like gravel and a mind that operates like a steel trap. He was initially hired to find Kurt, who had fled a rehab facility in Los Angeles days earlier and vanished. His job was to bring him home. Now, standing in the sprawling, empty Lake Washington mansion, his job has catastrophically changed. The air is stale, filled with the eerie silence of a life interrupted. A half-eaten jar of spaghetti sauce sits on the counter. A lone sneaker by the door. Grant moves through the rooms, not just looking but listening, and the silence is starting to scream. He reviews the facts. Kurt's escape from rehab, his flight back to Seattle, the discovery of the body. But Grant's cop mind snags on inconsistencies. The suicide note, for one. He obtains a copy. He lays it out on a table, studying it under a lamp. The writing is Cobain's, but the flow is disjointed. The main body is a rambling, almost philosophical meditation on fame. Then the infamous sign-off, I love you, I love you. Grant focuses on the handwriting, the letter formations, the pressure of the pen. To him, the final line doesn't just look at it. It looks forced. The eyes are different. The loops are tighter. It's as if someone was trying to mimic a hand they didn't fully understand. Then the timeline. Courtney had claimed she'd been trying desperately to find Kurt, worried he was suicidal. But Grant was there. He was the one she hired. He remembers the specific instructions. Find him before he kills himself. Yet, when he'd suggested contacting credit card companies to track Kurt's purchases, a standard procedure, Courtney had hesitated. Pushback. Why? And the greenhouse. Grant visits the scene after the body is removed. He stands where Cobain lay. He measures the distance. He thinks about the physics of a shotgun blast, the sheer brutal force of it. He speaks to the medical examiner's office off the record. The official report states Cobain had 3 times the lethal dose of heroin in his system. Grant, a veteran of narcotics cases, knows what that means. A user that high isn't composing a coherent 4-page letter. They aren't carefully folding their wallet and placing it in a box. They are comatose or dead. A cold, dreadful certainty begins to form in Tom Grant's mind. This was not a suicide. This was a staging, a carefully constructed scene designed to look like something it wasn't. His investigation turns. He is no longer looking for a lost man. He is hunting for a killer. He begins to pull at threads, and the entire tapestry of the official story starts to unravel. He tracks down every lead, every whispered rumor. He hears stories of a mysterious Romeo character who had been hovering around Cobain in his final days. He uncourses financial documents, seeing the immense fortune that was about to be inherited. And he keeps coming back to one person. The one person who stood to gain the most from Kurt Cobain's death. The one person who had control of the narrative from the very beginning. The grieving widow, whose performance was so perfect, so devastatingly public, that almost no one dared to look behind the curtain. Tom Grant's quiet, dogged investigation was about to ignite a war that would rage for decades. He was no longer just a private eye on a case. He was a man standing alone, pointing into the gathering darkness, preparing to speak a name that would change everything. The war begins not with a shout, but with a cassette tape. Tom Grant, armed with a mountain of dissonant evidence, knows he needs a voice. Not his own. A cop's calm, reasoned deductions are no match for the raw, emotional tsunami of public grief. He needs a voice from within the inner circle. He finds it in the most unlikely of places, a private rehab facility. Her name is Erin Hoskins, a friend, a confidant. She was with Courtney Love in the days before Kurt's death. And unbeknownst to Courtney, Hoskins had recorded their conversations. Grant gets his hands on the tapes. The audio is grainy, intimate, terrifying. It's not the voice of a grieving wife. It's the sound of cold, calculating fury. Courtney's voice, stripped of its public performance, is a razor blade. She rants about Kurt, about his weakness, his planned divorce, the prenuptial agreement that would leave her with nothing. "I'm going to find him," Courtney snarls on the tape, her words slurred by pills and rage. "I'm going to get a gun, and I'm going to find him, and I'm going to fucking kill him." The air in Grant's office grows cold. This isn't grief. This is a motive. A threat recorded just days before the man in question is found dead with a gun. He plays it again and again. The pieces of a terrifying puzzle are slamming into place. He turns his attention to the days following Kurt's escape from rehab. The official story is that Kurt, suicidal, slipped away and flew back to Seattle alone, a ghost returning to his tomb. But Grant's investigation uncovers a shadow on the periphery of this narrative. A man named Michael DeWitt, Courtney's own personal nanny, a constant, looming presence. Witnesses place Callie with Kurt in Los Angeles. There are rumors Callie helped Kurt acquire the very heroin that would later be found in his system. And then, the flight to Seattle. Grant digs into the passenger manifests. His name is there. Michael DeWitt flew back to Seattle with Kurt Cobain. He was the last person known to see him alive, besides his killer. The narrative of the lonely, tortured artist ending his life in isolation crumbles. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a loyalist to his wife, a wife who had just been recorded threatening to murder him. Grant's investigation leads him to the sprawling, empty mansion. He isn't looking for ghosts. He's looking for forensics. He focuses on the greenhouse. The official police photos show a single set of fingerprints on the shotgun. Kurt's, a seemingly definitive piece of evidence. But Grant, a former homicide detective, knows a clean gun is a red flag. A shotgun of that type, especially one that had been recently purchased, should have been covered in the prints of the store clerk, the handler. The fact that only Kurt's are present suggests one thing. The weapon was wiped clean, and only his prints were deliberately placed back on it. The suicide note itself becomes a central character in this building conspiracy. Grant consults handwriting experts. Their analysis is cautious, but damning. The formation of the letters in the final line, the infamous I love you, exhibits significant differences in slant, pressure, and rhythm compared to the body of the text. It is, they suggest, a strong possibility that it was written by a different hand. A forger's hand. The case is no longer about inconsistencies. It is about a pattern of deliberate deception. A threatened wife. A mysterious companion. A wiped-clean murder weapon. A forged suicide note. A crime scene that defies the physics of a self-inflicted wound. Tom Grant takes his evidence public. The media frenzy is instant and divisive. He is either a heroic truth-teller or a parasitic conspiracy theorist, profiting from family's tragedy. Courtney Love's camp attacks him viciously, dismissing him as a disgruntled ex-cop. But the seed of doubt is planted. It takes root in the hearts of fans who never wanted to believe their hero could abandon his daughter, his life, in such a way. The official story, once a solid monument of tragedy, now shows deep fractures. And through those cracks, a chilling new possibility begins to emerge, not from the shadows, but from the very heart of the inner circle. The question is no longer just what happened in the greenhouse. It is who, and the evidence is pointing in a single, horrifying direction. The public battle was a maelstrom of tabloid headlines and televised shouting matches. But the real war was fought in silence, in the cold, hard language of evidence. And the most devastating blow was yet to come. It arrived not from Tom Grant, but from a figure who had been silent for too long, the man who found the body. Gary Smith, the electrician, had given his statement to the police. It was straightforward, but years later, haunted by the scene, he would speak again, and his memory had sharpened, not faded. He recalled a detail the official report had omitted, a detail that changed everything: the door to the greenhouse. When he first approached, it was not simply ajar. It was locked from the outside, with a heavy wooden wedge jammed firmly beneath it, sealing the structure shut. He had to remove the wedge to get inside. The image is paralyzing. Kurt Cobain, alone in the greenhouse, dead from a shotgun blast. But the door is locked from the outside. The implications are staggering. If he was alone, who locked the door? If he killed himself, how did the wedge get there? This single, forgotten detail transforms the greenhouse from a solitary crypt into a locked room mystery. The conspiracy theory now had a spine. It gained a name, the Courtney Theory. Its architects were a small, dedicated group of investigators, journalists, and former friends. They built their case piece by piece, each fragment more unsettling than the last. They pointed to the finances. With Kurt's death, Courtney Love inherited his entire estate, worth millions. A divorce, which Kurt had reportedly been contemplating, would have been financially catastrophic for her, governed by a stringent prenuptial agreement. They pointed to the Romeo. Michael Callie DeWitt, the shadowy nanny, became a figure of intense scrutiny. What was his true role? Was he a caretaker or enforcer? His presence on the flight to Seattle was the thread that unraveled the myth of Kurt's solitary journey to the grave. Most chillingly, they obtained a photograph. It was taken days after the death, inside the mansion. It showed Courtney Love, clad in one of Kurt's dresses, laughing maniacally while holding what appeared to be a small, clay-like statue. To believers, it was a voodoo doll, a trophy. To them, it was the mask slipping, revealing a glimpse of a terrifying reality beneath the performance of grief. The Seattle Police Department, under growing pressure, quietly re-examined the case. But their conclusion, released years later, was a reaffirmation of the original finding: suicide. They dismissed the locked door, suggesting the wedge may have been used to keep it open, not closed. They downplayed the heroin dosage. They stood by their work. For the public, this was the end, the official seal of closure. But for the believers, the SPD's review was a whitewash, a cover-up. It only deepened their conviction. The questions they raised were not answered. They were merely dismissed. The debate splintered into two irreconcilable realities. In one, Kurt Cobain was a profoundly troubled young man, a genius crushed by the weight of fame, his addiction, and his own demons. His death was the tragic, inevitable conclusion to a life lived at a breaking point. The inconsistencies were just the messy, illogical details of a real-world tragedy. In the other reality, Kurt Cobain was the victim of a carefully planned assassination. A man who was becoming a threat to powerful interests. A murder staged to look like a suicide, orchestrated by the person who stood to gain the most. The inconsistencies were not mistakes. They were the deliberate clues left by a killer who believed they were too clever to be caught. The truth became a ghost, forever flickering at the edge of vision. You could choose to believe the official story, a tale of singular, heartbreaking sadness. Or you could follow the trail of clues into a much darker, more complex labyrinth of betrayal and greed. There was no middle ground. You either saw a tragic artist or a murdered icon. The evidence existed for both. The world moved on. Grunge faded. New stars emerged. But the mystery of April 5th, 1994 never died. It simply went underground, simmering in the dark corners of the internet, in late-night conversations among fans who still looked at the photograph of the smiling, shy man from Aberdeen and wondered which version of the story he would have believed. The final, unsettling truth was not about what happened in the greenhouse. It was about the story we choose to tell ourselves. And the most terrifying possibility of all was that the official story, the one we accepted for the sake of closure, was the greatest conspiracy of all.